You wake up fast, but not because you heard something, because something feels wrong inside your head. The room is quiet. The strange part is that the fear doesn't feel outside anymore. Then the screen moves, and you know for a fact you didn't touch anything. Now your brain starts racing, because this is no longer just a weird feeling. Then you find the mark. Tiny, clean, fresh enough to be real. One device reacting could be random. Two of them reacting feels much worse. And that's when the question changes. Not what is happening, but who got there first. This is not science fiction anymore. It already lives in labs, clinics, and real surgical rooms. The basic idea is simple. Take signals from the brain and turn them into action. Not full thoughts, not memories, just patterns strong enough to produce a response. A cursor moves, a system answers, and suddenly the idea stops feeling theoretical. Because once a signal leaves the brain, it doesn't stay alone for long. That's where the line starts to blur. Medical device on one side, connected technology on the other. And this is where it stops sounding impossible. A person stays still, and the machine begins to answer. The brain is always active. The challenge is turning that activity into a clean, usable signal. Then comes the moment that changes everything. No hand moves, but the cursor does. That response may look small, but for the person controlling it, it can mean everything. Because this isn't magic, it's focus, effort, and signal translated in real time. And once the system starts responding more than once, it no longer feels like a demo, it feels usable. That's when the scale starts to expand. Not one task, not one screen, but an entire category of control. And the line is crossed very quietly. A thought becomes action, and the world answers back. At first, it looks like advanced medicine, a breakthrough contained inside hospitals and recovery rooms. But the story changes when it stops being rare, when one success becomes a process that can be repeated. Because treatment is one thing, a managed device ecosystem is something much bigger. The moment software enters the picture, so do updates, settings, access, and control. And behind every elegant device, there's usually a larger system no patient ever sees. That's how the shift begins, from clinical miracle to connected product logic. And the more useful it becomes, the harder it is to imagine life without it. That's the breakpoint, not when the chip is implanted, but when the system grows around it. The moment brain activity becomes data, it stops belonging only to biology. We already treat messages, searches, and photos as private. Neural data may sit even closer to the person than all of them. This does not mean reading every thought. It means extracting patterns that still reveal far more than we're used to. Attention leaves traces. So do hesitation, reaction, and what the brain responds to first. Preference can leave a signature too, sometimes before a person ever explains it out loud. And once that data exists, the next question is no longer technical. It becomes legal, commercial, and political. Who stores it? Who evaluates it? Who decides whether it stays medical or becomes part of something else? The danger is not only theft. Sometimes simple access, copying, or silent misuse is enough. That's the first real nightmare. The mind does not have to be fully read to become dangerously exposed. The moment software enters a system this intimate, small technical choices start carrying human consequences. And that's what makes the risk feel different. A tiny error here does not stay tiny for long. Because once updates, patches, and remote support become normal, so does the possibility of something changing at the wrong time. Reliability stops being just a technical promise. It becomes part of a person's daily safety. And the danger is not only hacking, it's also permission, access, settings, and who gets to touch the system at all. Some of the biggest risks look almost boring: copying, syncing, transferring, storing, and no one noticing what moved. A failure doesn't have to be dramatic to matter. One wrong response at the wrong moment can be enough. That's when the attack surface changes. It is no longer just a device problem, it becomes a human one. And that is the second real nightmare. When software gets close enough to the brain, technical risk becomes personal risk. The next danger is harder to see, because the real power may not sit inside the brain at all. It may sit in settings, permissions, and quiet decisions made far from the person who depends on the system. And once a medical breakthrough becomes a service, control starts to look like maintenance. Updates feel normal, until normal means your reality changes when the system changes. And the tighter the platform becomes, the harder it is to leave without losing something important. That is how permission becomes power, not by entering the mind, by shaping what the system allows. The more useful it becomes in daily life, the less voluntary it begins to feel. No one has to force adoption. Advantage alone can do most of the work. The smoothest systems can be the hardest to escape, because convenience hides dependence. And that is the quiet shift. You stay at the center, but not fully in control of what surrounds you. That's the darker nightmare. No one has to control the brain if they can control the world wrapped around it. This is how the pressure starts, not with force, but with friction. One group moves faster, the other loses seconds, then loses chances. At first, it's just convenience. Then it starts showing up as performance. And once that gap reaches learning, training, and adaptation, it stops being a workplace problem. It becomes a life problem. The real shift is when advantage feels normal. That's when people stop asking questions. No one has to be pushed out. They just have to feel a step behind the world around them. That's the soft trap. If refusal costs you everywhere, how free is the choice? Employers may never demand it directly. The market will make it feel inevitable. And slowly, society starts moving at two different speeds. That's when optional becomes the most dangerous word in the room, because it still sounds free long after it stops being free. By this point, the divide doesn't feel personal anymore. It starts to feel like part of the city itself. The first split shows up in the roots. One lane is seamless, the other always costs time. Then speed becomes status, and the faster layer starts to feel more central, more valuable, more normal. After that, services follow the same pattern. Better support for some people, slower systems for everyone else. And eventually, the divide comes home, not as drama, but as two different versions of everyday life. It reaches relationships too, because living at different speeds changes how people stay in sync. Then the pressure goes even deeper. It stops being only your choice and starts shaping choices for the next generation. And once access itself has a price, economic inequality starts turning into cognitive inequality. That's when the split stops feeling temporary. It starts to look built into the structure of society. And the darkest part is how calm it all looks. One world still running smoothly, just not equally. The first defense is simple. A technology this intimate can't outgrow the laws that govern it. And if neural data exists at all, the person it came from must control it. Ownership and access. Security can't be a checkbox. It has to be tested, audited, and challenged from the outside. But safety isn't enough. A real safeguard is the right to refuse, disconnect, and walk away. That's the narrow path out of the nightmare. Set rights, limits, and accountability before convenience beats consent. By the end of this story, the chip isn't the whole story anymore. It becomes medicine, software, infrastructure, and society merged into one system. And that's what makes this future so hard to judge, because the same technology can restore power and quietly rearrange it. The deepest question isn't what the device can do, it's what happens to freedom when thought itself leaves a trace. Maybe that's the real tension underneath it all. The system can feel helpful long before it feels dangerous. So here's the question that remains. If the chip could change your life, would you take it?